Hey, welcome into the Husker247 Postgame Show. You are getting just Mike Schaefer tonight after Nebraska's 44-25 win over Wisconsin. Sorry, not used to using 25 as a score, even though I'm sure I've guessed it multiple times on the Hypecast. Because Big Ten has weird score games because Luke Fickell goes for two inexplicably after not going for two when he should have went for two. But hey, that's not Nebraska's problem. And there were very few problems for Nebraska on Saturday night as they handled its business against a Wisconsin team that was kind of fragile coming in, and Nebraska came out, started fast. The quick kick return from Ja'Cory Barney, a really crisp drive to get the 7 points right away. They gave up a touchdown, but then responded. Nebraska scored again, gave up a field goal. Nebraska scored again. I thought it was critical that they were able to get 3 touchdowns early before they kind of had the field goals that interspliced the rest of the scoring, because it allowed them to put some distance between them and Wisconsin on a day where their defense didn't play great. Nebraska's offense answered the bell and really drove the field much of the day. So I'm going to dive into a few thoughts that I have. It probably won't be the longest podcast or as long as kind of the 20-minute ones that we've done in the past, but I just wanted to make sure we got a podcast out. Wasn't able to link up with Brunts or BC. We've got some different things going on here on Saturday night, but I wanted to make sure that at least there was a little post-game coverage. Of course, there will be the Sunday side session Sunday morning, but I know a few of you want your coverage now, and so I want to be able to bring that. So I want to start by hitting on individual performances that I thought really stood out. I'll start. It's largely going to be the offensive side of the ball, but we'll start on the offense, and then we'll mix in some defense and, of course, some special teams as we go along. And I think you have to start with Emmitt Johnson. I mean, this was a terrific performance. Let me look at the stats here. Fairly certain he had over 200 yards of offense by himself. He was just short. He had 198 yards of offense today for Emmitt Johnson. Just a strong performance. He had 22 touches for 198 yards, had a long reception of 27, had a long run of 19. He was terrific for the Huskers, and he really kind of did it in a variety of ways. He did it on the outside and in the short passing game. He did it running up the middle. He did it busting some runs to the outside. Nebraska's running game concepts today were really on point. They really speak to what we'd heard about Dana Holgorsen, which is he dresses things up. He'll get the wide receivers all to one side of the field, shift the defense's focal point to that direction, and then he's going to pull offensive lineman and get the running back running to the short side of the field or away from where those wide receivers are at. That's one way that you can mitigate perimeter blocking, is that you don't have to rely on those guys, especially if you can get a big pulling lineman. You can seal the edge from the side. They did that a couple times on Saturday, and Emmitt was good in that circumstance, but he's also good taking it up the middle. Nebraska's offensive line had a terrific day. I won't single any of those guys out individually, but as a unit, no tackles for a loss allowed, no sacks allowed. I don't know when the last time that we've talked about Nebraska and it's been the case. And so I think that's a really just impressive performance all the way around from Nebraska's offensive line, and Emmitt Johnson, big beneficiary of it. Shockingly, no touchdowns for Emmitt Johnson on Saturday. He got the ball inside the 5-yard line at least once on a reception, but he really did his damage, between the 20s. And then Nebraska brought in the big touchdown vulture and Dante Dowdell. 3 scores for him today. He had a nice touchdown run in the second quarter, I believe, going to the north end zone, where Luke Lindenmeyer just threw a hammer of a block, and the hole was big enough that even somebody like me could have run for at least a few yards before getting tackled. Somebody like Dante Dowdell was running to daylight. It only happened to need 12 yards on that play. It could have been 60 if that exact thing happened, if they were playing, further out on the field. And so Dante Dowdell able to get in there, drive in the runs, if you will, after the table setting from Emmitt Johnson for much of the day. And then even in the first touchdown, bouncing around a little bit here, I like the usage of Heinrich Harburg there. They brought him in. First play he's in for is right down there by the goal line. Nice, easy quarterback power, gets the lead blocking, powers his way into it. You don't have to mess with a lot of plays. You get a quick touchdown on the board. Great usage of Heinrich Harburg there. And so I thought the running game was on point. You had Some yardage from Ja'Cory Barney as well, who continues to be, I think, Nebraska's most dynamic offensive weapon. I know that's hard to say with what Emmitt Johnson did on Saturday, but I would place my bets on Ja'Cory Barney being the guy that makes defensive coordinators stay up at night, going forward, and the different ways that a Dana Holgorsen offense could really utilize him. Moving on from the running backs, you got to go to Dylan Raiola. Really nice performance, the best we've seen him look since really that Illinois game, or if you wanted to, the second half against Purdue. But that Illinois game, I mean, he was on point. He had the one interception on a 50-50 ball that I felt like either should have been a touchdown or an incompletion. I don't understand how it's an interception. Whatever. We're not here to talk about officiating. But Dylan Raiola, 28 of 38, 293 yards, nearly a 300-yard passing game. I would have actually liked to see Nebraska run the score up on Wisconsin. If there's one program where I feel like that is a thing that, it seems allowable to do, it'd be one that's kind of been the bane of your existence for so long. But still 293 yards passing for Raiola. What was interesting, there's a lot of short passes. I mean, Emmitt Johnson was a big part of that. If, Nebraska's stat broadcast has a stat where they have big plays. And if you look inside of those, I mean, Nebraska had 8 big passing plays. They were able to utilize the offense to kind of create some big passing plays, but it didn't have to start 25 yards down the field. It could just be a quick throw to an Emmitt Johnson. They had a successful screen play today. I know that's hard to believe, but Nebraska was able to pull it off, and it could have went for even more if Johnson was able to shake a tackle late, or if he would have picked up a big block from his offensive lineman who was just running downfield, didn't have anyone to block. He's just running down there looking for somebody to touch, and there's nobody there. And so that's a pretty good sign usually for Nebraska, especially if you're getting that in the passing game. So I thought that Dylan Raiola did a nice job taking advantage of things. The numbers would have looked even better. A couple critical drops for Nebraska. They had 2 drops in the end zone. Isaiah Nair on what was a perfectly thrown ball. Should have went for a touchdown. Nebraska ends up with a field goal. We'll get into John Hull in a little bit and the nice day that he had. But it felt like Dylan Raiola was even better than the 28 for 38 that he was. And he's still growing. He's still getting better. You could see a comfort level in the offense today that hadn't been there for most of November, all of October. And so I think there's certainly a reason to get excited about what's to come for Nebraska football, especially offensively. I mean, it feels like they're kind of scratching the surface of what they have. And if you get an offensive line performance like they had today, like I said, no sacks, no tackles for a loss, you're getting quarterback performances, you're getting Emmitt Johnson looking like he is. That's a fully functioning offense. That's working on every level. We haven't seen that a lot. Like, that's not something that Nebraska, even when it was going good in September, it was sometimes, Dylan making some nice throws down the field against UTEP, Dylan making a few nice throws, or Dante Dowdell ripping off a huge chunk run against Colorado. But it wasn't as complimentary as it looked today. And that's a really good sign, given that it was Dana Holgorsen's second game. And that's a Wisconsin defense that's not what we think of it as, but it statistically was still on the upper echelon of the Big Ten, which is usually a pretty good defensive conference, at least relative to college football. It's definitely a good defensive conference. So it's not like they did this to Purdue. Nebraska did this to a team that needed a game and needed to win as bad as they did. They did it to a defensive-oriented coach. They did it to an outfit that only allowed, 16 points against Oregon the week before. Granted, home games, away games, totally different thing. You got to give Nebraska a lot of credit for what they accomplished on offense. You got to give Dana Holgorsen a lot of credit. A couple other people I want to shout out here. Nate Borkircher, Luke Lindenmeyer. Didn't see a lot of Thomas Fidone. He had a false start. I think he was in for a couple plays after that. And then honestly, it was a lot of Nate Borkircher, Luke Lindenmeyer blocking, sealing the edge, opening things up. Each had catches. They were involved in the passing game. Borkircher had a nice 19-yard catch towards the end of the game. He's a guy, we did so many podcasts this offseason, and I can hear Brian Christopherson saying it. And he's like, don't forget about Nate Borkircher. That's a guy they really like over there. And we hadn't seen much from him this year. And he had a nice catch today and was utilized well. I mentioned Ja'Cory Barney a little bit earlier that he had an 11-yard run. He also had, I believe, 85 yards receiving. Let me pull up the stats here. Where are we at? Ja'Cory Barney, 85 yards receiving, 10 targets today, caught 9 of them. You love to see that. The one he didn't get, end zone throw from Dylan Raiola. Raiola's got to put it on him. He threw it too high, threw it too far. It needed to be a little bit flatter of a throw for a receiver like Ja'Cory Barney, not nearly as big as Jamal Banks or Isaiah Nair. But that was the one miss. Otherwise, when the ball went to Ja'Cory Barney, he caught it. He made things happen. He had 96 total yards of offense. He had the big kick return to kick off the game. Ja'Cory Barney is a guy that I think is a special player. There's a reason why before Dylan Raiola was committed, he was the number one player in my class for last year. I went back and forth with Andrew Ivins, wondering if he was going to get a bump on 24/7. There was guys in the evaluation team that really liked him. I think it was a battle back and forth, but they thought his size was a little limiting. I think this is a guy that any team in the country wants. I wouldn't be surprised if there's tampering going on. Nebraska's going to have to figure out how do you make sure Ja'Cory Barney's part of this operation going forward because he's a special player. Elsewhere, I mean, I mentioned the offensive line, mentioned the tight ends. Let's dive over to special teams before we get to the defense because that's not going to be as much fun. But Brian Buschini, who I've been very critical of, has played very well towards the back half of this season. He had 2 big punts today, had a 52-yarder that was a great punt, would have flipped the field even better if Nebraska's coverage unit was better. It is what it is at this point in time. Nobody likes that saying, but that's where you're at when you're 11 games into the season and your gunners are that far off of the pace. But that's what it is. They're going to have to figure that out. I'm expecting an overhaul from the special teams in the offseason. We'll see how things play out. Brian Buschini, though, also nailed a punt inside the 5-yard line. I don't want to go back and do the research on this, but I'm pretty sure he doesn't have many of those in his Nebraska career. He's got a fair amount of punts inside the 20, but a lot of them seem to just sort of fall in that 18, 17-yard range, which is great. That's what you're trying to do. But when you can pin a team deep, when you can force them to play back, it helps your defense out. Now, Nebraska didn't get stops early in that drive. They allowed, Wisconsin to pull themselves out of it and work their way down the field. But ultimately, he's doing what you want him to do. You do that enough times, it's going to help you out. The defense is ultimately going to get some stops and you hope play a little bit better in some situations moving forward. And now John Hull. I mean, I don't know what to say about this guy that hasn't already been said, but since the Ohio State game, he's been perfect on field goals. He's given this team a big boon. You can tell there's confidence now in some of their play calling and what they want to do because they know when they're in plus territory, they've got an opportunity for 3 points. He's got a big leg. He made all 3 field goals today. I don't think any of them were super long, but several were in the 40s. And it's just good to see. I mean, this is a guy that he had 1 from 45, 1 from 37, and a short from 26. They're all good, and that's what matters. This is what you want. You want to have complementary football. And, special teams, the coverage unit, you had a dumb penalty called because someone spiked a football in 2024. That's got to be a penalty now. There's a million things that happen in a football game that's not a penalty. We got officials who can't spot a football to save their life, but we're sure as hell going to throw a flag because an offensive lineman spiked a football. All right, moving on from that. Nebraska didn't have good coverage on the kickoff. Would love to see him go back to trying to kick the ball through the end zone instead of the pop-up kicks. It worked a couple times against Wisconsin. I think they had 1 stop inside the 20. They also allowed more than just getting to the 25. I sometimes think they outsmart themselves with this. Take the free yardage when you're returning it. Unless you have the opportunity like Ja'Cory Barney did, they returned 1 kick and went for 45 yards. Maximum usage. Great job. When you can kick off and you can pin them deep, don't let them have returns. You give up a 44-yard return, you're letting the other team start in plus territory because of a dumb penalty that shouldn't be a penalty, but you can't be in control of that. These are the sort of things that you want to see them iron out. This is when you think Nebraska is going to get to being a better football team, is when they stop making self-inflicted dumb decisions. Starts on the coaching staff, translates over to the players, but it's got to start on that coaching staff too. Let's move into the defense here. Not a great game. Secondary was terrible. There's no other way to say it. And it's a concern. The good news is you're playing Iowa. So they're not going to throw all over you. But here's the bigger issue. The run fits coming from the safeties were really, really bad. And I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. This isn't new. The concern I have is that you have a program of accountability, you preach accountability, and you watch the same couple guys on the back end make mistake after mistake after mistake, and they're not coming out. I get that they're leaders. I get that they're veterans. I get that they're single digits. That shouldn't matter. If it's accountability, it's accountability. That's not happening. And, we're at the end of the season. You're just going to get through it, right? But these are guys that you're counting on to make plays, and they're having horrendous busts. They're taking bad angles. There was a lot of missed tackles today. A lot of missed tackles. Can't have that. You cannot have that in most games. You got away with it against Wisconsin. They did a nice job in the run game, except when they had a couple big runs. And where do those big runs come from? Bad run fits, bad tackling, similar players on the outside. You if you know where the culprit's coming from, you can't expect them to play perfect and you can't expect them to play great. Then I think it's reasonable to expect some other guys to have the opportunity at some point in time. We'll see what happens. I'm not looking for any changes with that. It feels like they've kind of made their bed and they're willing to lie in it. We'll see how that goes. Elsewhere in the secondary, I mean, like I said, there's busts in coverage. Went at Malcolm Hartzog again, as we saw USC do. Didn't have as much success with it. But again, early on that first touchdown drive, they hit a slant route, and Isaac Gifford's got to make that tackle. These are the tackles that I'm talking about. These are the players that I'm talking about. This is the opportunity that I'm talking about. You're on the field. You got to make that play. He made that play in 2023. He didn't make it in 2024, and that's not new. And so, Nebraska survives. They give up a touchdown. They win the game ultimately. But next week against Iowa, you're going to be challenged in run fits, and you've got to fill those better. And the back end has to be able to fill those better. And it's not like everybody played bad. I mean, the defensive line was solid up front. Wisconsin ran for a little over 100 yards, did most of their damage on 2 runs. Otherwise, was largely held in check. I mean, I don't think there was a lot of concern with what they were going to do in the running game. Nebraska continues to be a really good short yardage run defense. I continue to chuckle every time a team just thinks it can go up the middle or bounce one off to the outside against the spill of this defense on a 4th and short. John Bullock was fantastic on that play. First defender through the hole, completely guessed wrong, didn't go towards the running back. John Bullock's right there for the spill, cleans it up, gets the help, finishes the play. John Bullock has been a revelation for Nebraska this year. He's a guy that I didn't know that he had this performance in him. He's often been the best player on defense, right there with Ty Robinson, or the couple games where you get the plus version of Jamari Butler. But John Bullock's been terrific, and so I just want to make sure to shout him out. Another area that's a little concerning: no sacks. Didn't really feel like there was a ton of knockdowns. You had a couple opportunities where people got in on excuse me, Braden Locke, the Wisconsin quarterback, but 292 yards, no sacks. You had some plays on 3rd down where you're sending 3 in pressure. You have 8 back and they're torching your zone. That's not going to work. Again, Big Ten football, you're not playing the best of quarterbacks, but if there's 20 yards of space between the first grouping and the second grouping, most Big Ten quarterbacks can make that throw. Wisconsin was able to do it a few times on Saturday. Again, nitpicking, but gave up 25 points, gave up 290 yards passing to an offensive outfit that doesn't throw the ball particularly well, that only had 1 game better this year, and it came against a Purdue defense that's one of the worst in the country. This isn't the standard. This isn't what Tony White wants. And so I think Nebraska's got a lot of work to do in the offseason, got a lot of work to do to figure out what it is that they want to be on defense and how they want to attack, and the right players put in the right place. But next week, they have an opportunity on Black Friday against an Iowa offense that's going to run the ball with Caleb Johnson. They're going to run the same play over and over. You have to hit your run fit. You have to make tackles. You make contact. You got to hold them up until someone else can help out, or you got to get them to the ground. And I know that's easy to say sitting from this wonderful podcast studio in my basement, but these guys are there for a reason, and you're being asked to do these things. Nebraska needs it. They're not going to be able to rely on getting 44 points. As we know, they hadn't done it before. First time in the Matt Rule era, they scored 30 points in conference play, let alone 40 points. So this is a luxury. You're probably not going to have that against Iowa, though I wouldn't mind seeing it. But still, it's going to be an interesting contest out there on Black Friday. Looking forward to catching up with Jake Sorensen of the 93.7 The Ticket tomorrow for the Sunday side session. Should be a good conversation. Invite everyone to check that out. Invite everyone to check out everything we have going on at Husker247. A lot of great coverage. BC and Brunts are killing it from what they got out of the interview rooms. We've got the report card up. We've got the game balls up. No one gave one to an opponent. First time that's happened in a little while this year. So feel like that's kind of notable. But it's just good to see. I mean, I think that this was a cathartic win. I think it was a cathartic win for the team. I think it lifts a lot of pressure off the shoulders. And I think it allows Matt Rule to operate in a space where he's probably a little bit more comfortable than constantly having to kind of walk on eggshells and hope that he can get a team ready to kind of get past a fragile mindset. And they get to go into Iowa City, I'm not going to say that they have house money here, because there's still a win-loss at stake. But this is an opportunity to play Iowa where you don't have to get that switch win. It's not 2019. It's not 2023. You have the opportunity to go play this game to the best of your abilities, to match up against a team that you've had on the ropes multiple years and you've let off the ropes. It's a great opportunity for Nebraska and Iowa City. So we'll see what they're able to do. Somehow I told you it was going to be a shorter podcast than usual. Somehow I ended up talking 20 minutes by myself. Apologies if it was sounding like I was droning on, but what are you going to do? Be sure to check out everything we have going on at Husker247. Be sure to check out that Sunday side session tomorrow morning.